bought Kevin a one-way ticket to San Diego. I continued on alone to Belize and Guatemala and then turned back up to Mexico, where I stayed for the next 4 years. My mailing address was Lista de Correos, just general delivery. I didn't have a phone. It wasn't on purpose. Almost nobody in the town had phones. But also, I didn't want a phone. I cut myself off almost entirely from my family, not just during the years in Mexico, but even after I returned. Kevin had been the very last person left standing in my corner, and this trip, at least in hindsight, had been like a bridge to fix things back home, to show that I wasn't such a bad guy. Instead, it only proved what I'd always feared. I was a bad guy. What I didn't know through all this time was that Kevin actually did get over this stuff quickly, pretty much as soon as he got back to San Diego. He had said things would never be the same, but never means something different to a 16-year-old kid. And I guess I'm not surprised Kevin's over it. He's not like one of those pricks who holds a grudge. I'm the one who couldn't let it go, any of it. It was that trip in Mexico, for me to hit him, to beat him the way that I did after the childhood we had. I felt ashamed. Kevin and I had never really sat down and talked about this, but I know I let him down. Not just in Mexico. Long before that. All through our childhood. There were beatings, just this violence, like every other day. When I was 9, I saw my stepfather throw Kevin face first into the sharp corner of a wall. It opened up his forehead. So much blood. Kevin was 4 years old. Even now, almost 40 years later, sitting in front of him, I can barely stand to tell him what happened when we took him to the emergency room. Right off the bat, stepfather saying, he tripped and fell, he's bleeding, we need to get that fixed. And they asked Mom, and she gave the company line. And then they asked me, and I said, yeah, he tripped and fell. And, as the older brother, I had a responsibility. Regardless of what was beaten out of me, I had this responsibility, It hits me now when I look at your face. You've got that, that scar is a part of you that is a part that I wish I could forget. I bet. And we would go visit Dad every other weekend, and he would ask, and I wouldn't say anything, I wouldn't do it. And then our dad didn't know what our stepfather was doing to us until one weekend when Kevin was 9. Kevin had been beaten badly, and he must have said something to Dad. I wasn't there. I don't even know what you said.
Well, you were there. We were going to Dad and Kathy's on Cove Drive. Dad and Kathy wasn't there. He took a little bit different way. We were on a more scenic route from Lakeside. Like the 67, remember the sunset in the mountain road. And I remember I had just told him that, oh yeah, I got beat for leaving the paint out. And then, after getting beat and told to come back out in the living room, I spent about 40 seconds feeling sorry and trying to act normal. That 40 seconds passed and I didn't pick up the paint again. And so I got beat again for not picking up the paint. And it just was...
was this the electrical cord?
That time it was. Back of the knees to the middle of the back.
The only thing that it took to get us out of that bad situation was for somebody to speak up. For me to tell my dad, my real dad, the truth about our life at home. But I was too afraid to say anything, so I said nothing. And this fact, more than most any other, makes me hate myself. Because I was the big brother. It was my responsibility to speak up, to protect Kevin. Instead, he's the one who stood up. He's the one who told our dad.
And he called CPS, he called the police. They took Polaroids in a room of my bare ass and back, and we sat around a table and said, the policeman asked us, I want you to name every time you've been beat. That was the table there on Cove Drive, the dinner table. And we looked at each other like, oh, do you have a while? And for years after that conversation, for years, maybe decades, I thought of what I had forgot to tell that guy. Oh, I never mentioned that time. And I'd know right away that I hadn't mentioned that. Just, it would pop into my head and go, oh, I didn't mention that.
Telling Kevin that I was sorry about the fight in Mexico, that was one thing. Talking about the stuff that happened when we were little, what I didn't do. Apologizing for not protecting him as a kid. That's what I really needed to say to him. For the past 20 years, I've lived like half an hour from Kevin. He invites me to stuff all the time, but I don't go. And I'm not much of an inviter. I don't see him much, or the rest of the family either. Our past has always held me back. I've got a lot of regret.
I'm kind of sad to hear that you have so much remorse over it. I don't blame you for it, and I don't blame you for being older and should have known better. That is something that happened a long time ago, and I don't want you to be tortured by your past. And I hope I haven't done anything to continue the torture. You know, you're loved.
I'm a different person now than I was at 21. Mostly. It took a long time to get my karma straight. But I'm still not a guy who's going to start a conversation with you on an elevator. And I'd rather you didn't either. Also, I waited a long time, but I'm married now. I have a daughter who's 9 and a son who's 7. They have a very different life than the one Kevin and I had.
I'm gonna have this plate.
A couple of weeks after we spoke, Kevin asked us to come to Thanksgiving at his house. I drove up with my wife and my kids in a vegetable dish. There were a lot of people, like 22, extended family. People who see each other regularly but don't see me much at all. Kevin likes having all this family around. It makes me a little anxious. My kids played with his kids. Nobody got punched in the face. It was nice. I hope to see them at Christmas.
James Spring in San Diego. He still spends a lot of time in Mexico, where he searches for people who've gone missing.